Hi, my name is Haley Mullins-Portera, and I'm a senior sociology major at Birmingham Southern College. For my senior research, I wanted to do a content analysis of queer adolescent roles in modern television. The reason that I chose this was because after undergrad, I planned to go to grad school to get a master's in counseling and become a therapist for adolescent populations with a focus on the LGBTQ adolescent population. And I think a lot of the youth identity and queer identity is synthesized from what we see on TV. So I wanted to see if there were good examples of the LGBTQ identity and relatable characters on modern television. So that's why I chose this topic. And then before I begin, I'd also like to thank my professors, Dr. Mills and Dr. McIntyre. They have been so helpful through this process, especially since we had to transition to at-home learning. So I could not have done this without them keeping me on track. So in 2019, the GLAAD review showed an increase in LGBTQ representation. And for those of you that don't know, GLAAD stands for Gay and Lesbian Alliance Against Defamation. Basically what they do is they watch television and film and come up with statistics on how much of the LGBTQ population is represented on TV and film for a given year. In 2015, it was only 2%, and by 2019, we've increased to 10.2%, which is amazing, and they hope to get it all the way up to 20% by 2025, which would be great. But the reason that I wanted to do this project specifically was because there is a distinct difference between representation and acceptance. So we could represent the LGBTQ population on TV all day long, but if we're not constructing identities for these characters that are valid and show them as more than just being part of the LGBTQ community, as being real people, not using harmful stereotypes or tropes, then what good is the representation without the acceptance? So what I wanted to find out is, are Euphoria and Sex Education, which are two new shows, which I'll get into, good examples of the LGBTQ plus identity for LGBTQ plus youth, or are they more shows that provide unrelatable characters with one-sided stories? So a little bit of the history of the LGBTQ plus community on television. Ellen was probably the very first in 1997. She came out on her sitcom Ellen, and it just broke barriers that no one had seen before, and then immediately ABC put a parental advisory warning on the show because it was no longer suitable for children because she was gay. And then shortly after that, the show was abruptly canceled. Next, The Sopranos had a character that was gay, and he was murdered for being gay, which plays into the always killing the gay character stereotype. In Firefly in 2002, Anara is a bisexual female, and she's over-sexualized. She works as an escort. In One Tree Hill, Anna struggles with her sexuality. She comes out as a lesbian, and her family moves away. She's never on the show again. And then Glee, Kurt is the only openly gay kid for the beginning of the show, and his entire character is based around him being gay. And then Brittany and Santana get into a lesbian relationship, and it's just used as a sexual trope. There's really nothing else to them. And then Modern Family in 2009, Cam and Mitchell are gay and married, and they don't perform any deviant behavior or like harmful stereotypes, but their characters are made up of a lot of just very obvious gay stereotypes, so it is harmful in the end, even if the stereotypes themselves are not about harmful behaviors. And then a couple more. Will and Grace came out shortly after The Ellen Show, which really popularized the gay best friend trope. And then The L Word was another influential show, but it was all about lesbians and bisexuals, so there wasn't really a lot of room for showcasing them outside of their sexuality. And then the two shows that I wanted to focus on for this project specifically were Sex Education and Euphoria. So Sex Education came out last year. It had 40 million viewers. It came out on Netflix. And it provides a diverse sample of high school students as far as race goes, and their storylines have a focus on sex and relationships in the modern age. So in season 1, there's only one gay character, and then in season 2 it gets a little bit more into the LGBTQ spectrum, so that's pretty diverse as well. And then Euphoria came out last year on HBO. It had 5.6 million viewers. It kind of sparked like a cultural phenomenon because of the makeup and the fashion with Gen Z. And it follows a group of high school teens of all different backgrounds, races, sexualities, and gender identities with a focus on relationships and addiction. So for my theory, I had 3 guiding theories behind this research. The first was critical theory. So critical theory was a theory popularized by Horkheimer and Adorno. And they were really critiquing culture itself. So they were saying that culture is the values and beliefs of a given society, and that society as a whole has moved away from local or folk culture, which is like individualized culture, and moved completely into mass culture. And they were saying mass culture is basically fed to us like a business market. Whoever controls TV, film, media, they're in charge of what we believe, basically, because they're synthesizing the culture. And then next, I had role and status set theory, which was popularized by Robert Merton. And Merton said that your status is the position you hold in society, whereas your and the expectations that go along with it, whereas your role is your public expression of that status. And then finally, queer theory was the guiding research, or the main guiding theory behind this research. And queer theory is mostly about breaking out of the binary, so breaking out of just male and female and heterosexual and homosexual. They look at everything as a spectrum, dismisses the ideas of labeling, and asks society to look at everything as a spectrum as well. So for my literature review, I first looked at reproduction of behavior. So basically what that is about is due to the limited scope of an everyday person's life, they may reproduce behaviors based what they see on television, film, the media. So if there is a LGBTQ plus character that's constantly performing deviant behavior or playing to some horrible trope, then that might be someone's only experience with an LGBTQ plus person before they actually meet someone who identifies that way. And then next, I looked at the effects of the media on younger viewers, which basically said that the effects of the media are more prominent among younger viewers, so they're more likely to be influenced by the culture and the mass culture. And then the GLAAD report for 2019 really just spoke about crafting LGBTQ plus characters with care, which I really like that phrase because it is very important to be very careful because, like I said, whatever you're putting out there, that is being put in the minds of the viewers of your show, and these 2 shows are so important because they showcase high school age people, so it's probably high school age adolescents that are watching them. So for my methods, first I wanted to start by defining LGBTQ+, which is lesbian, gay, bi, transgender, and queer, and then the plus is intersex, asexual, and it goes on and on and on because, like I said, it's a spectrum, and wherever you fall on it, your identity is valid. So I wanted to see if sex education and Euphoria are fighting for tolerance or acceptance. So basically, as I was saying earlier about representation and acceptance, I wanted to see if they were just throwing LGBTQ plus characters at the wall to see what stuck, or if they were actually giving them full characters, full narratives, which is what we want. And then I chose these 2 shows for the age of the characters, so high school, and the diversity in the sample. So in these 2 shows, they make up a lot more of the LGBTQ community than I think many television shows ever have. And then they're all high school age, so it's most likely that it's probably going to be high school age kids not only watching the shows, but relating to the characters. So my independent variable was the television show, and then the dependent variable was the storyline of the LGBTQ plus characters. And then finally, I selected episodes using a random number generator. First, I watched the entire show all the way through, and then I would put, like, if there's 13 episodes in a show, basically, I'd put 1 through 13. If it gave me episode 8, then I'd watch episode 8. And I would do this 3 times for each show. In Sex Education, I did 3 times for both seasons. So the LGBTQ characters were what was being synthesized, but I also analyzed the non-LGBTQ characters as a control, and they were analyzed via guiding questions. So basically what I do is put down tallies for like the number of identities, the number of times they spoke, was any deviant behavior performed, to analyze the shows and see if these 2 shows were constructing helpful narratives. So here are my tables, and these are my results for Sex Education and Euphoria. As you can see, in Sex Education and Euphoria, the number of statuses given to the LGBTQ characters is really exceptional. And in Sex Education, it's really pretty uniform across the board as far as non-LGBTQ and LGBTQ and number of statuses. In Euphoria, it's actually the LGBTQ plus characters that have more statuses than the non-LGBTQ plus characters, so that's great. And then in Sex Education, the non-LGBTQ characters do talk a lot more. Which you may look at the first part and see, oh, well, Eric spoke 62 times. Well, he was analyzed in 4 different episodes from the first season to the second. So that's really 62 divided by 4, whereas Otis spoke 82 times, and he was only analyzed in 2 episodes. Whereas in Euphoria, you can see that it's pretty even, but actually it was the LGBTQ characters that spoke more than the non-LGBTQ plus characters as well. So again, here's another way to look at it. Non-LGBTQ characters in Sex Education spoke 63.1% of the time, whereas LGBTQ plus characters spoke 36.9% of the time. I know this looks worse, or it looks bad, but it's not as bad as it looks because the main character is non-LGBTQ, so that skewed the data a little bit because of Otis being the main character. But when you look at the show in terms of number of identities, they're almost identical, with LGBTQ characters actually having more by 1 than the non-LGBTQ plus characters, which is really what we wanted when looking at these 2 shows. And then for Euphoria, the non-LGBTQ plus characters spoke less, so they spoke 37.5%, whereas the LGBTQ plus characters spoke 62.5%, which is really good. However, the main character in Euphoria is LGBTQ plus, so that could also skew the data a little bit more for the LGBTQ plus side, since the main character is a lesbian. And then you can see here the number of identities is exactly the same across the board, which is really great. It puts the LGBTQ characters on a really level playing field as far as the wholeness of the character with the non-LGBTQ plus. So I think this show is a really good example of equality across the board. So overall, the themes I found were there was no significant difference in either show as far as status amounts go, which is really good because all of those statuses were not including the fact that the character was gay. Like, I was not in my research counting that as a status. These were all of their statuses besides being part of the LGBTQ plus community. So that was really great. And then another finding was, obviously, Sex Education has a white, cis, straight male protagonist, and Euphoria has an LGBTQ plus mixed-race female protagonist, which doesn't necessarily make Sex Education a bad show, but Euphoria does provide a lot more diversity, as well as the LGBTQ plus characters do speak more, and they are more represented in Euphoria. And there is more deviant behavior overall in Euphoria, which is kind of the drawback, because then it's kind of hard to tell, like, are they stereotyping gay people as being, and transgender people as being deviant, or are they just stereotyping teenagers as being deviant, because it's every character all the time is doing drugs or having sex or doing something that is deviant or illegal. And then for sex education, one statistic that I wanted to point out that was not in the table because it was from their individual episodes was in the first episode of sex education, I did Eric, and 1/3 of the time that he spoke in that episode was about him being gay. Now that is great for representation, but it's not so great for crafting a whole narrative for Eric. He did have significant improvement from the first season to the second and really had a full storyline by the second story, which was really great development. And I hope that if they're renewed for season 3, that they keep that going even more. Because Ola in the first season was portrayed as straight, and then in the second season she realizes she's pansexual, but then that's all her character becomes, and I really just feel like they failed her because every single time she spoke in her episode it was about being pansexual or being someone's girlfriend, and they really painted her as like a hardcore feminist, so I was really hoping for maybe more from them in terms of Ola if they get renewed. And then my limitations were both shows are about deviant behavior on paid services that allow for more of it. So this is a limitation because what about the cable networks that don't allow deviant behavior? Are they really portraying like a real storyline of teens? Is that unrelatable? And then what about people that can't pay? And then also, both shows have less than 10 episodes, and Euphoria only has 1 season, and Sex Education only has 2. So this is a limitation because it's still not a ton of representation unless these shows continue or if they make more shows out of the same vein. And then for future research, I would like them to repeat this study against the old shows. So really looking at all the old shows that I mentioned before, doing the exact same thing with the tallies, the number of identities, the number of times spoken, and then comparing them to shows that we have now like Sex Education and Euphoria. And then the pansexual and transgender community are part of Sex Education and Euphoria. Ola's pan and Jules is trans. So those are represented in these 2 shows, but I feel like overall they have been very, very underrepresented. So I'd like to see some research about how to further those narratives and also what they've been in the past. So the next couple slides are just my references. I'd like to say thank you so much for watching this. Thank you so much, Katie and Megan again, and the sociology department for making this happen, and I hope you all enjoyed my presentation. Thank you so much.